And I went up through Bierstadt, and before going up any of the peaks, I really checked them out in the hikers books and online. And he talked about the willows and you got to watch out.
There's a boardwalk over them now. They're not even hard anymore.
Well, back then I'm thinking willows, and then I saw them and I was going, whoa. Casey, where are you?
Yeah.
Here. I'm going, no, come this way.
Welcome to the Greens and Blues 14er podcast. This episode, Zach mows down Gatorade, I break my thermometer, and we sit down with author and adventurer Wells Jones. So Zach, we are going to talk with Wells Jones here in a minute, but what was it that intrigued you specifically about talking with Wells?
Well, Eric, Wells actually reached out to us, which is a first on the podcast.
It is.
Who would want to do that? And in the modern era, we can stalk people electronically. And I looked him up, and what a fascinating guy. What struck me was the variety of things that he's done. He worked in Antarctic pararescue. Like, I didn't even know you could do that. He did an adventure trip through the Middle East. He does sunrise ascents of 12ers and 13ers and 14ers. He's also an actor. If anyone wants to, they could go look up the IMDb page for Tad Jones and see that he's acted on a bunch of different series. Just a really interesting guy. It's not our traditional kind of person that hikes a lot in Colorado, but I just thought he would have a variety of experiences that speak to the spirit of adventure that goes along with hiking. He really talked about what that's about and about the physical aspect of it and this desire to get back to the mountains that kind of keeps pulling you back, or in his case too, Antarctica kind of kept pulling him back. So what intrigued you about talking to Wells?
Yeah, I think you summed it up great, Zach. I think just the variety of experiences he's had, I guess the perspective he has on those experiences, like he remembers those experiences very fondly, and he was able to speak very well to them and kind of present them in a way that, for someone like myself that's never been to Antarctica, he was able to kind of paint the picture. Hey, here's what it was like. Here's what we experienced down there. And, of course, it wasn't easy because I don't think anything in Antarctica is easy, but here's the fulfilling, rewarding result of being down there. And so I agree with you. It was really intriguing to kind of get into the adventures he's taken and what the results of those were.
Yeah. And I think for me, the idea of thinking about hiking as a part of a life of adventure is really important. And I'm only able to hike in Colorado or in New Mexico, maybe 20, 25 days a year. And the rest of the year, I do other things. And I'm really intrigued by people that have a life of adventure, and it's not just mountains, it's travel. It's maybe a job they had when they were younger. It's the whole package. And I really like that about Wells, is that his experiences were various and broad. And I think it's great. And I think it's an inspiration to do more of the kind of things that he's up to.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I hope you guys enjoy the interview with Wells as much as we did. He was really fantastic. And here he is.
Well, we're here today with author and adventurer Wells Jones. Wells, it's great to have you on the Greens and Blues podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Eric and Zach. It's good to meet you both.
Wonderful to meet you, Wells. Before we get started, is there anywhere that people can find you if they want to look up your books or adventures?
Well, I have been very antisocial on
as we are too, I'm afraid.
It's wacky. It's just where I land. But I am on LinkedIn. The book is called A Line in the Sand. It's co-authored by myself and Miles Spencer, a very close pal. And we published it on Amazon. So we have it in three formats. It's a paperback, it's a Kindle, and it's an Audible. And the Audible is with Ballerini is the voiceover guy, and he's terrific. So you can find it on Amazon.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
That's for those of you that don't know and are going to Amazon at some point. A Line in the Sand is a book that we'll be discussing in a moment. It's a fictionalized version of a real journey between friends through the Middle East. Wells, you're kind of an interesting figure for us. We normally talk to people that just hike 13ers and 14ers in Colorado. And I think Eric's title of an adventurer seems apt for your life resume here. You've done a bunch of different things, trips through the Middle East, some hiking of peaks, as well as a number of other things. And so I guess the first question that I have is, how did you get your start as an adventurer? Like, where does this desire to get out come from? And it may be literally where you're from in life, but where did you get your start?
Well, we ended up, I'm from a military family. My father was an officer in the army, and I was born in Germany in Stuttgart, and my brother was born there, older sisters, as with a large family, 6 kids, 2 sets of twins. And so there were 3 different locations, army bases around the world, mostly the United States, El Paso, Oklahoma.
Oh, really?
Fort Sill, gentlemen.
Yeah, in Lawton?
There it is. And Stuttgart. We ended up, I started school in South Carolina, and I came to Vermont with a very heavy South Carolina accent. And that got me into trouble real quick in 4th grade. I got just as far as the playground, and I was shoved into the dirt really fast because they didn't understand my name. I didn't even say it right. So they picked on me from the beginning. Anyway, Vermont, skied. It was a very small rural area. 5 towns feeding a school, graduating class of 31. I had no business going to college. It was 1973, which tells you where I land age-wise. 1973, with a motto that the class, these 31 fellow students agreed that they liked my motto. It was the motto of our class, and it is, "One man with courage makes a majority," which pretty much was where my head was. And that lit me up. I thought that was incredible. I've since found that one man with courage can inspire a majority.
I like it.
But I decided to go into the Navy. I had plans about going to the Navy. They didn't work out. Something better worked out. I was attached after training in an A school to an organization that flew planes for the National Science Foundation in Antarctica. So we were the air arm to all the research going on down there. And so that was my introduction. They had a parachuting rescue team. I applied. It took me 6 months to become a member. And when I set foot in, it was 1974 on the ice, I was on, it was icy, but I was on fire. I just was so excited because it was skydiving, precision skydiving, and medical training for extreme weather. So that was the beginning.
I mean, Antarctica, period, but Antarctica in the 70s. What was that like? I mean, that sounds totally surreal for someone like myself.
I used to say it's like, think of Edmund Hillary because of the clothing alone.
Yeah.
The beauty of being on the team is that we saw it, and they ate it up testing equipment. We tested for MSR that was brand new, Mountain Safety Research out of Seattle. And MSR was just coming out with their dome tents. And so we were taking them to the polar plateau at the South Pole or different areas on different glaciers and testing them as we were training. So what was it like? There was no Gore-Tex.
It's all wool.
Yeah.
It was much heavier.
Yeah.
And I found, and especially the military gear was not adequate. So we had to have, as a team, better gear and better equipment. So we sought that and really we turned to the Kiwis, which are the New Zealanders. These fellas, mountaineers from Mount Cook and the Hermitage, were part of Scott Base, which is the New Zealand Antarctic program. They had dog sleds. I mean, they were the real McCoy. So their clothing were anoraks. I still have my anorak. It comes, almost not to the knee, but you cinch everything up and you take extra string and ropes to tie around your knees so you don't trip on your own. I mean, it was great. And so wool, silk.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of Dachstein gloves? Do you know what Dachstein?
No.
Thick worsted wool mitts, that are almost impenetrable and a little hard to move around. But I jumped. We did a South Pole skydive jump, January 1977. There was a jump. Part of the team was invited to test the navigational equipment, and it was our chief of the team was making his 1,000th jump that day. Wow. And so it was a combination of testing navigational aids and him, and so we had the opportunity to jump. And I jumped with the Dachstein and had an outer shell put over it. Underneath it all, I had a thin, you would call it a liner now. Back then, it was anything I could find. I mean, at some points, we were putting our feet in plastic bags. And so actually, on my jump that day, the outer shell just flew off, jumping on the back of the C-130. And the tail ramp froze. And so we're hand cranking the tail ramp of a C-130, passing oxygen around, getting ready, and we're watching for the first time the red light go green. We have never done this. We always throw our own streamers out. We do our own spotting. And at any rate, flew out the door and my glove flew off. It was 156, and I mean, it was minus 56 degrees that day.
You were doing Antarctic pararescue.
Correct.
Did you ever do any rescues?
Yes, just minor actual helping people out of crevasses and sprains and stuff like that. The organization, VXE6 was the Navy call sign for this organization. We flew ski-equipped C-130s, Hercules, and twin jet engine UH-1N helicopters. The helicopters were orange, which was really cool.
Yeah.
It stays light 24 hours a day, pretty much, while we're there. And we had a plane, my first year, a plane went down and we got the call. And it was the first time of really practicing, keep you cool. McMurdo's on a hillside, lava from volcanic ash and stuff built on the hillside. And the helipad was down below, closer to the water or to the ice, the Ross ice shelf. Mm-hmm. And when I got the call, it was, we're on, red alert. And didn't know exactly what was going, but it was a matter of getting down to the helo, get a flight to the airfield and get on board and fly to where the plane was. Meanwhile, the plane we knew had crashed. We call it a mishap. You don't call it, there's been a mishap. What's the degree? Don't know. No one knew. We prepared to skydive in and we were 15 minutes out. We found out another plane had landed, had been diverted. It was flying some scientists around, beat us to the site. They landed and they said, all's clear, plane is incapacitated, cannot get out of there. So we didn't rescue anyone, but we ended up with 2 planes down. That second plane that landed, they attached JATO to the plane. JATO is jet assist takeoff. Mm-hmm. What happens when you're plowing through open field snow, this sastrugi, which is waves of the way the wind creates the patterns on the snow, on the surface with snow. So they're trying to plow through it. It rattles the JATO. JATO goes through wings or goes through a fuselage. And so it's very dangerous stuff. And in both cases, one was the nose ski broke off on the second plane. And so that was a mess. So we had 2 full crews of Danes, French, British, Russian, American scientists, rescue crew, and 2 aircraft crews strapped to the back of the third C-130, my plane, when we were trying to take off.
Oh my gosh.
And it was one of those things, probably at least 25% of the people were sucking on oxygen, and they were traumatized. So we were dealing with that. No one was hurt, but they had really experienced intense explosions and a crash and getting out of it and turning back and looking at it, and they were on it. And then another plane picks them up, and then they go through it again. So they're on the third plane. We had 33 people strapped right up to the ceiling, up the back of the ramp of the C-130. No one knew that there was going to be JATO exploding right next to them through the portholes.
Oh, wow.
And so when that fired off, even myself, it was shocking, because it's like the plane is blowing up. The JATO extinguished. We're crashing through the snow, and the JATO was done, and we're still crashing. I mean, we probably went several miles trying to take off.
Holy smokes.
And it just quietly, it was like nothing. And you could see, we were looking out the window, the little window. Aircrew guy is bouncing around, strapped, just going, no, we're down. We're not going to get out of here. And it was like something, is there a God?
Something picked you up and lifted you up into the air.
So that was the most dramatic instance, that a list of could have beens. And since then, they created an entire area called Dome Charlie. It's now on the map. It was nothing. It was just a lat long, where scientists were exploring, and with the possibility of getting equipment in to do core samples. That's the big thing, is to get equipment to do, a core sample, going way, way down to understand what's been going on.
So how long were you in Antarctica, or going to Antarctica for Antarctic pararescue and so forth?
I was there 3 seasons. Seasons last October to February.
Gotcha.
The last year, I was on Windfly, which is winter flying. So you're in the first 2 planes that land after the winter over. And back then, you see, it was a big deal, because you're bringing fresh food and mail to the people that wintered over. And then, you're trying to shuttle it to the South Pole, but we're talking about McMurdo. The night that I was there, it was October 7th, 1976. And they said on the chalkboard, it was 136 below. And it was like, what it was, there was 80 knot winds. There was no one. I was there to open up a space, and to get from one building to the other, to get to the mess hall, there was a rope set up for me to go hand over hand to get,
That's so cold. They measure it in Kelvin, not in Fahrenheit or Celsius.
Single digit Kelvin too.
I had several sleeping bags I was in. I put everything that I brought with me on top of me. I mean, fingernail clippers. It didn't matter. I had everything on top of me. When I woke up in the morning, it had been a bunk I had been in the year before. When I woke up in the morning, the nail above my head had a little string from my breath.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah.
Coming off of it.
Wow.
It was that cold.
That seems to, like you said, it lit you on fire.
Yeah.
So that inspires a kind of life of adventure afterwards, it sounds like. So you do this really formative experience for really the first 3 adult years of your life, right? 4 years. Where does that take you then? Or are we about to get sidetracked here?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll go fast, because what I wanted to do is be a smoke jumper. My best bud, Paul, and I said, man, we're going to be smoke jumpers, We'll go up to the Pacific Northwest. We'll go to Montana. He said, they're just starting a whole new thing there. I'm great. So I checked into it, and you have to be on the ground for several seasons before you become a smoke jumper. And so what I really wanted was to fly jets. And on my way out the door from the Navy, my commanding officer, I'd done very well, first of all, and I was recognized for doing well as an individual and as a part of the rescue team, and also as an individual. They have, Sailor of the Quarter stuff. And so I'd made that and made a mark, to the point where my CO said, I'll put you anywhere in the world. You like to ski, you like the snow, I'll put you on a desk in Australia. I'll get you whatever you'd like. I said, I want to go to college. I want to go to jet school. And he just said, son, I know you do. I have heard that. He said, your eyes are not good and you're 6'3" and it's not good.
This is not for you. I'll do anything except that.
It's not going to happen. And I said, thank you, sir. I'm moving on. I ended up going to acting school. Ended up being in Santa Barbara, stayed on the West Coast. Point Mugu is our staging base, U.S. base. And so I moved to Santa Barbara, went to schools, did some acting. That was an adventure. You know? And I ended up going to New York, going to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. That was another adventure. Did very well there. I got out of the school and just like less than 2 weeks later, I was in a show I was getting my equity card. It just seemed to be right. The flow was happening. And I got out, I did a show, came back to New York. Said, what am I going to do? I got an agent, a very good agent, and it was for commercials. And he said, oh, you're not going to be able to do commercials. I ended up doing well. I did beer commercials. I did Gatorade when it first came out, playing a baseball catcher.
You guys can't see, but there's a chugging that went on of Gatorade, and it looked visual. Like 1980 something Gatorade chugging for a Gen X kid like me. So
yeah, and beer commercials. I played a Dutch skier in a beer commercial, which was great with a Dutch accent for Molson's beer. Walking through the lodge and talking, and there's a beautiful, such and such, and responding in a little repartee. So it worked out really well. And the cool thing is that I love theater, and you don't make money in the theater. And it happened to be that I think it was maybe a year and a half before the main, most recognized name, Lee Strasberg, passed on.
Yeah.
And, the actor's studio, Strasberg studio, his son, the number of people influenced, Pacino, De Niro, Marlon Brando, Marilyn Monroe, so many, Eli Wallach, many old, goes back. But his son and his son's wife were starting a repertory company. And my agent got me an audition. And I had nothing on a resume. I went in there, I was doing the audition, and I could see out of the corner of my eye, this guy's looking some work done in Santa Barbara, a few shows in the acting school, but it says Skydive Antarctic Pararescue Team.
Yeah, that's something different.
He said, stop. And I said, oh, Lord, I guess that's that. I've heard about these rejections, And he said, come here. Tell me about Antarctica. And I just said this and that. And then he's just going, that's incredible. It's incredible. He said, okay, I'll see you later. He said, excuse me, sir. Am I? Yeah, you're in. Show up on, we'll get in touch. But it was that. And so I've been tapped on the shoulder to do some really wonderful things from the acting. I couldn't support a family with the theater acting.
Yeah.
And ended up having children and stepchildren. And so we turned that into a production company, my wife and I. And for 29 years, we had quite an amazing run of doing productions. We ended up doing things at the Kennedy Center, Lincoln Center, around the United States.
So all this time that you're doing all this, are you lusting for what you had when you were kind of lit up earlier in your life? Is there something that's pulling you back? It's weird to talk about Antarctica as wilderness, but it's wild.
Yes.
Is there something that's trying to pull you back into this life of adventure, or do you feel that tug the whole time?
The dreams were always there. Dreams. And I found that it started with getting, like I talked about, the Oslo Yukon mountaineering boots. I started with that, and even in my dressing room, it wasn't a dressing room, dressing area with other guys, on my mirror, having things like that tacked on there, and it was, I'm going to get there. I'm going to get back to it.
Hmm.
And I would do a little bit, in New York, there was opportunity. Wherever you are, you can run around a lake, you can swim the lake,
Mm-hmm.
you can, do it on one foot. And I seemed to be that way. I was running around Central Park all the time doing theater and being in school. And then I guess I was doing it at night, I was like sticking my neck out in a way. That was the level that I could enjoy, coupled with the accountability for schooling, then the accountability for family and children, and they absolutely had priority.
100% hear you. I mean, I'm in Oklahoma doing roughly the same thing, earning a living and raising a family.
Before we get into your book, Wells, and some of your mountain adventures, I have to ask you, you mentioned smoke jumping and
Yeah.
the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
And so I got to ask you, just off the record maybe, are you DB Cooper? Did you steal money and then jump
He
out of a
probably could have
plane?
done it.
And yes, you would have been equipped for it. And
Who, me? Come on, man. Nice guy.
I'm gonna start doing some. Maybe that's a new conspiracy that I should just start. Wells Jones is DB Cooper.
Yeah, equals.
So, Wells, you're living this kind of life of doing really interesting artistic pursuits and raising a family. The next big adventure I see kind of there is this Middle East adventure in the early 2000s that you did with your friend. How does that arise out of your imagination? And maybe try to describe what this journey is and how this kind of idea germinated for you.
There is a progression. I've been able, only with doing this kind of talking and having to think about what are the dots, how do you connect this, is that the production work was so massive. And you talk about adventures and organization and getting adaptability, the skills that it requires to be an adventurer. Here's what the guy said: it's high endeavor, uncertain outcomes, total commitment, tolerance for adversity, and great companionship. That's what an adventure entails,
Mm-hmm.
And doing productions for the first time at the Lincoln Center, working with superstars, working with high people. So all of it was managing that, learning the skills, other people's skills, and how to combine them. And then I met up with Miles Spencer. We did a show called Money Hunt, and that was another artistic pursuit. But then after that, we did Kayak for a Cause. You see, Kayak for a Cause, adventure with purpose. You raise money, create a pod of 10 kayakers, raise money, and we're going to give the money to charities, and we're going to have a big party to celebrate. Well, we worked up to 313 kayakers, a Guinness record, and writing checks for $50,000 to 5 charities. And then, depending upon the year, the last year was Dickie Betts and the Great Southern. We've had the Whalers. We've had Neville Brothers, just a whole slew of people. So adventure with purpose. After my work in Washington, D.C., I ran a foundation for 4 years in D.C. until 2005 when we moved to Golden. And on that move to Golden, I met up again with Miles. We'd had about 4 years off, and he told me about Kayak for a Cause, and then I became a part of it and handled all the production. And then he asked me if I knew anything about T.E. Lawrence. And I said, yeah, as a matter of fact. I really thought about doing a one-man show as an actor to have something as a backup.
Mm-hmm.
I said it was Mark Twain. It was Hal Holbrook with Mark Twain. I thought, he's so brilliant. Why don't I do Lawrence? And then I found out he was 5'5.5". And he wasn't Peter O'Toole.
No, he wasn't. He did not cut that same glance that Peter O'Toole did in Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, well, I could act like Peter O'Toole, but that's not Lawrence.
Yeah.
And the whole point would be that it became an icon for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it happened early, before even talking with Miles. I read 7 Pillars of Wisdom. I read some other things, and that was the beginning. And Miles said he did too. And so the year is 2005, and Miles says, but you could play him, and we can bring him back on stage. and show how we got into this Middle East mess, because he was in the center of it.
Yeah.
The Paris Peace Conference and all the agreements. He encouraged the Arabs to revolt, and they were given, the promise of their freedom from the Turks and their own autonomy, as a nation, creating their land, self-determination. Well,
Yeah.
didn't happen.
Didn't happen. Became part of British protectorates and
Oh,
so forth and so on, and the House of Saud, and yeah.
That's
anyway.
right. And so we found a Broadway producer. We didn't find it. We were introduced, and we introduced the idea. And since then, we've been working with her. We've commissioned different writers, starting very high level. She had the ability to, go to Sir Peter Hall and go to big names as playwrights and directors. And so we're at the point finally with a play, we're now workshopping it, developing it with actors. In 2005, we said, well, we got to go there. And, after we go, we want to bring the Lawrence character, the guy who's going to play it, back, get his feet in the sand, because he would be able to be more authentic. So that was the impetus for going. And underneath all of that, it was based on Lawrence's as a Westerner, his writings, his love for the area, people. We wanted to see if that's accurate, because the only thing we heard from 9/11 on, it just built and built and built and became shock and awe.
Mm-hmm.
And it became retribution. And it was like, well, what's really going on? We'll have the opportunity to find out. Plus, we'll be able to have this information for the play to help the playwright.
So what's the journey that emerges out of this? So where do you start, and where do you go, and how are you going to do it?
We said, first we have to figure out how to get into the country, get into Saudi Arabia. Lawrence's path really began in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and he worked his way up, and there were different wins along the way, or lack of wins, not successful campaigns going up the Hijaz, the Red Sea. The one that people think of because of the movie the big turning point was Aqaba. When the taking of Aqaba, the Turkish fort, and the brilliance there was Lawrence, because he said it's impossible to attack from behind because it's the worst part of the desert. To move troops in the Turkish minds, no one could do it. Well, these are tribes that live in the desert. These become guerrilla warriors. And it was Lawrence that worked with Auda Abu Taya, who was the number one Hawitat warrior, bought into the idea. It's in the movie, but in real life as well. And so he approached the fort, who had all their guns and cannons facing the water, the bay. What people don't know is that on the charge going into the fort, when they finally go, Lawrence shot his camel in the head and was thrown from the camel and passed out. Fort was taken in minutes. And when he woke up,
the battle was over.
It was over.
There was no battle. And so we used T.E. Lawrence as our guide to the Middle East.
And were you doing this on foot, on camel? What was your means of transportation?
Well, there's two stories here. One's the fictional story in the book, which is mostly camel riding. We actually hired a travel company. We found a travel company that was willing to read 7 Pillars of Wisdom. Now, there weren't a lot of travel companies around in 2005, not like there are now, not at all. It's a whole booming business. But this group, R. Caruso and company, Bob there, read the book, and then he said, okay, what do you want? Well, we wanted to go under the wire. And so we had local cars drive us from a city to a city. No driver of a car ever knew or saw the other driver. So there was no chance of being detected or being followed, because the training that we received from our risk assessment SAS major, that was the private secretary to Prince Harry and Prince William, and he had been with the Irish Guards. He had just worked with Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman for Long Way Around.
Yeah, that's a great film.
In that whole series, right? And we did not know that until we met Jamie. And he said, I took this on because I've just finished with Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman. Oh, we didn't know that. Oh, that's great. And so he was very clear about, he knew the path. We were going from Saudi, following T.E. Lawrence. He knew all about the cities, Jordan, into Syria, and then we were going to go into Israel. And his specialty was kidnap and ransom. And he said, of all the places, Saudi doesn't play around. If you are kidnapped, you will be gone. It's death. It's political, he said. And there are people that do that. Look at 9/11.
Yeah.
And he said, but Jordan is like, much more westernized, wonderful country. And Syria, there's a lot of stuff brewing. That was in 2005.
Yeah, about 6 years before it really started brewing, right?
Exactly. Which leads, we trained for 8 months. So we did a lot of research and we followed Lawrence's path right up to Damascus, just as if it was the revolt. So we went through the key areas where battles were fought and saw firsthand. When we got to the fort in Aqaba, there's a video of us on the Aqaba short that's there. That's me running through the fort in Aqaba and then looking out to sea. It's like the fort is under attack. And so we thought, let's just, so that what you're getting there, that's the real fort and the remains. And it's pretty good shape, actually.
So you go on this amazing journey, amazing in a variety of ways, right? Both amazing in terms of the fact that you couldn't do that right now.
No.
I mean, you could do the Jordan part and maybe the Saudi Arabia part, but also amazing in the sense of these are historic areas that are the cradle of 3 different religions, the cradle of all these different political orders. So what are some of the things that you saw that really struck you on this journey? Moments where you're just like, wow, I cannot believe what I'm seeing here.
Well, it's believe what I'm seeing and believe what I'm hearing. My background in religion, Miles and I met in a church, and I'm very familiar with the Bible and the prophets. And going to the Middle East was an eye-opener all the way up to Damascus and finding out that at the Umayyad Mosque, John the Baptist's head is interned. And it's very formal and very...
Note to our listeners, one of John the Baptist heads.
Okay. You're right. But
there are multiples. There's actually 4, I believe.
There are 4.
Yeah.
But the Pope did go through and honored the crypt that's there, that's very elaborate, and the people that are touching it and bowing in tears and just so that the prophets are shared with all 3 religions. And, that's huge.
I find that when I talk to people about religion and especially that part of the world, there's 2 different reactions that I tend to encounter. One is, oh, I went there and I can see why these people have always been in conflict with one another. And then the other one is people that go to that part of the world and they go, oh my gosh, they all come from the same tree. They all share this common core of ideas and prophetic witness. And they're all kind of drawing from the same deep roots. The flowers on one branch may look different than the other. And it sounds like you're of that latter group of finding that deep sense of commonality. For the most part, through most of Middle Eastern or Occidental history, has kind of like Damascus was the home of Christendom for thousands of years up until basically Bashar Assad about 60 years ago. So the sense of kind of co-belonging and people living together is not unfamiliar to them, and the sense of a common root is not unfamiliar to them, although recent history may prove us wrong on that. But it sounds like you're in that group.
Very much. And first of all, people were very surprised we were there. And the level of contrition, the level of grief, the level of sorrow, the expressed again and again, we are so sorry for what happened in 9/11. Why are you here? We're here to see with our own eyes. And they'd say, you are welcome. Come. Now is everyone. We went through 39 checkpoints. And at the checkpoints, for the most part, they were all armed. And some, there was like going from Saudi into Jordan, They said Huckle. And the guy was out of uniform. He was unbuttoned, and he had a rifle. It wasn't even an assault rifle. It was, like a 22, old, indicating empty your backpack. It was like a parachute table, about 30 inches wide and 30 feet long, and just everything. And he's open it up, and it looks like a computer. And you open it up, and there's nothing inside. Huh? Hello. I say, Internet. It was a broadband global access network unit. You open it up, and it's empowered to, connect, triangulate, and connect with internet connection. And you speak of the flowers, and see these people, it's just the accoutrement, the manners and the customs, but the sense of family, love, sharing, storytelling, big. And it's not involving governments. These are just people. Just said, we are not all terrorists. We went to a majlis with His Royal Highness. His Royal Highness, when you say a Royal Highness, is someone that's an actual member of the royal family. So this was the son of a king, and he wasn't young. He was probably 60 at the time. His Royal Highness Khalid bin Faisal bin Abdulaziz, so his direct lineage. And we went to his majlis with his sheikhs. And this was after the trek. It's when we actually produced a very large event there. But going to the majlis, afterwards, he said, join me for dinner. You will see that we're not all terrorists. And we did. And he gave us his word that we could travel through Saudi freely. And we were being honored for wanting to see the people and being Americans. And he was very gracious. And we found most people were.
I want to ask about, you were residing then in Colorado, and then you moved in, I think 2009, you said, to New Mexico.
Yeah.
And so you come home from this adventure, and it sounds like you start hiking peaks. And that's kind of what our podcast is about. So I wanted to spend a little time there. You have a particular way you like to hike peaks. I want to hear what that is and why it developed.
Well, it started in Colorado, and it started on Bierstadt. And I went up to Bierstadt, and before going up any of the peaks, I really checked them out in the hikers' books and online. And they talked about the willows, and you got to watch out.
There's a boardwalk over them now. They're not even hard anymore.
Well, back then, I'm thinking willows, and then I saw them, and I was going, whoa. Casey, where are you? Going, no, come this way. Dad, I think we got to go this way.
Yeah, Eric and I have had that a few times.
The willows, figured that out. And I've read, and, the Mountaineer's Handbook, people that have climbed, all the different nationalities climbed Everest and K2 and whatnot. And my other icon is T. Lawrence and George Mallory. So I've done a lot of reading of George Mallory. And when you read that people say, I got up at 3 a.m. to do the ascent, to get the summit. And so I said, why don't I just start doing that now? And so I started on Bierstadt to get up to the top for sunrise, and wanted to do it solo. I think it was the level of peace, the amount of things going on, with family, with work, it was my meditation in motion, and it was private. And if I felt like just screaming or just singing or just quiet, I am not one that goes with ear sets, even when I used to run. No, I want to experience.
Definitely not advisable before sunrise too, because you may need to hear some things creeping and crawling
animals
around.
Going around, exactly.
And I've heard stories, and fortunately, I haven't run into a mountain lion. So it started in Colorado, and I carried it forward to here. And I realized I was going, it's not a 14er. This is not worth it. It's 12,000. This is like, are you kidding me? It's like
12ers in New Mexico are hard, man. Yeah, they're no slouch.
Yeah. And so I just started. Part of it had to do, and it had to be weekends. So it was either a Friday night, usually a Saturday night. Friday night after a work week, getting up at, I think the earliest I ever got up was maybe 1 a.m. get a few hours sleep, get up, and then there's a 35-minute drive to get up to where I go. And I either go up one way or up the other way. And one is a 7-mile in and one is 3.
So what are these peaks
This
that you
is
like to go to?
Santa Fe Baldy is 12,622.
Mm-hmm.
And Deception Peak, which is above the ski hill. The trailhead is at the ski hill. It's Windsor Trail.
Yep.
And there's some wonderful directions to go. Nambe Lake. Oh my goodness, it's the Switzerland of, you've got the beautiful lake. And I'm totally into Wim Hof.
The guy that does cold method and all kinds of other things. Yeah.
Wild, Dutchman. Yeah. And so I like to swim or even doing Deception, which is what I've been doing the last 2 years, is Deception because of time. And
is there still a herd of mountain goats on the top of Santa Fe Baldy?
I have seen them, yeah. And it's just spectacular. The sunrise is coming up, and it's usually on my way down. It's just below the peak, too. You see them on the side of the hill and the way the sun smacks them, and beautiful. And there's also cattle. I would have called them, when I was in Vermont, I would call them like Black Angus, but they're so monstrously large and healthy at 12,000 feet,
Yeah. I don't think I've ever encountered anyone who's the majority of your ascents of peaks are sunrise ascents.
Mm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And now I'm even in a lower altitude from town. I go Upper Canyon Road to a peak called Picacho. And I think it's at 8,600 feet. It's a 1,500 vertical, but I'm not doing it for that. And I can tell you, I've done over 100 on Baldy and Deception in a number of years. And that's accurate, but it's not peak bagging. Every one of them, and it's all seasons. It's a personal experience. This morning I swam. Every other day I swim or I do Picacho right now, just to keep breathing.
Yeah, keep moving.
Yeah, and I don't mind the cold. There's no such thing as bad weather. It's just what you got on your back.
Well, spoken like a guy that was in Antarctica.
That was minus 136. Yeah.
I looked it up. I looked it up recently and said, you can't say that. I said, probably shouldn't say that. I look it up and say, what is the coldest it's been in McMurdo? They say, 89 minus 8. No, that's not, the 136. No, it was cold, but it also has to do with wind.
Yeah. That's the wind chill.
That's the wind chill. Exactly.
That's the one that matters, though.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's what you feel.
But when I go out, I look at the wind.
You have to.
I have turned back on Baldy, where it was another planet. This beautiful place with the sunshine and the sun coming up, it turns into truly a horror, scary story. It's gray and icicles, and the wind is crawling. And I said, no, stop, get down. Certain spot, you go above the saddle, you meet your certain spot, and that's where that's where you're going to get slammed.
Mm-hmm.
And where you lift your foot up and it throws your foot, like it wasn't yours, and just throws it.
Well, as you mentioned, like every other day you were either swimming or hiking a peak. So can you kind of dig a little bit into your training regimen, how you kind of keep breathing, as you say, or kind of keep in shape? Do you have a regimen? Are you exercising in ways that you enjoy? Can you kind of dig into that a little bit?
Well, that is what I do. And there'll be a day off. And sometimes if I'm traveling, I'm not as involved. Mm-hmm. That is it. And I wonder if it's enough, but it is enough for me, especially with what's going on right now. Deep dive into the Middle East and then deep dive into personal, how do you deal with all of this? So that's a 3-part series that I'm starting.
Is that in particular after the reignition of the Israel-Palestine conflict, October of 2023?
Well, that's why we wrote the book. It was because of that. We went to the Middle East because of 9/11. Mm-hmm. And we thought we would have a play done. We did more research on the play and watching, history repeating all the time. It used to be back in the day when the president of the United States, flew in onto an aircraft carrier and said, mission accomplished.
Yeah.
Right. It's still going on. So October 7th was anger becomes hatred. There's no turning back. And we did see that in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't all a joyride. It was very tense. But the book is a response, is to join the conversation and a view and some of the things that we've talked about, the commonality, a sense of commonalities of people and the religions. And that's in the book. It's not Miles and Wells, it's Magnus and Finn. But it also has two very contemporary young men in the book that are grappling love of country, love of religion, love of family. I got to go fight. I'm in the IDF. What do I do? And these two individuals come from a camp that's fictional in the book, but it's based on a real camp that's in Maine called Seeds of Peace.
Mm-hmm.
And Seeds of Peace, when we went to the Middle East, part of our fundraising was that we were going to give a portion. We gave 25% of it to Seeds of Peace. And we met with Janet Wallach, whose husband started it in New York. And we also met with Seeds of Peace graduates and people that have been going to the camp in Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Syria, individuals, and in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So we heard it from different sides. And the whole point of the camp is to bring conflict. They teach conflict resolution. And what I've been saying is, and I've heard so many times in stories of example, is that these kids say, I am not like my mom and dad. Didn't we all? I would never say that. That's not me. You don't believe in peace, mom or dad or whatever.
Yeah.
And they get in the room with, their counterpart from Israel or counterpart from Palestine, from Gaza. And there's a flare up. And to a person, they said, I don't know where it came from. I guess my mom and dad really infused me with these thoughts.
Yeah. Generational trauma is where it comes from,
And so that's recognized, and then they work to heal that. And so those two characters, Jeremy, whose mom teaches Middle Eastern studies at Columbia, there's all tied in to make it believable and real, and they're based on real people.
That's fascinating. Have you ever read The Lemon Tree?
No, I've heard of it. Tell me what.
It's a story about a family that was displaced in the Nakba in 1948.
Mm-hmm.
And they had this home that they had had for 600 years, so prior even to the Ottomans. And it had a lemon tree in the courtyard. It had, fed generations of them with lemons.
Mm-hmm.
And they're displaced. And then this Jewish family moves into this house. And there's memories even that when they moved in, even the food was still warm, of how recently they had been displaced from it.
Mm-hmm.
And what the story is about is this family that moves in. It's a little girl that grows up in that house, and it's her home. That family are Holocaust survivors from Hungary. About 15, 16 years later, the boy that grew up in the home, the Arab boy, and he's been tossed around in refugee camps and so forth, decides to go back to the house. And he could get killed doing it, just being an Arab Palestinian in Israeli territory. And he goes back and he meets the girl. And it's about their relationship, which is very fraught. They're friends. And at one point he gets imprisoned because he takes part in a rebellion. And at one point she tries to help him out. And he's living in this kind of hovel in Gaza. I think it's in Jeddah. And it's just their stories kind of weaving in and out of each other. And it's brilliant. It's probably one of the most even-handed human tales of two people that eventually come together and see each other's world.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's an amazing book, and I think it should be required reading. But just your story reminds me of that two sides, taking two people and kind of weaving their stories in and out of each other approach. And I think it's really effective as a device, but also it's true.
Yeah. Jeremy and Abdu and Sinjin, there's several young people that meet up again, and they're all connected through the camp. we found that the connection these young people made at 16 years old, 15, 16 years old were very deep. And then, of course, the Israeli side has to go to service, both male and female.
IDF for 2 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is. Yeah. There's so many things around that. How far do we go? When is retribution sated? You throw in righteous indignation. I don't know. I know that the stories that are on the ground forces us to confront with perspectives that are beyond our own.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they're real. And the people that are living these lives, I mean, we have what's just happened in California. My son's an LA County fireman.
Oh,
Wow.
okay.
And he said it was 36 hours. It was just nuts. And his station, there are 4 fire stations in Malibu. And so, I mean, he's right in the middle of it. And the devastation, the destruction, and it wasn't an opposing force. It was nature. It was fire. So
Yeah.
what people go through and the sense of loss and the stories I've heard and the friends and family that literally came home to nothing. It was just incinerated. And so when you see that with war today, one thing with fire, and that's awful, but to see the killing and the elimination, the resolve to do that on both sides. I'm not picking sides. I'm looking at almost the human psychology. T.E. Lawrence and Tafis came to this area of Syria. They're 50 miles from Damascus. It's been 2 years. They're wiped out. And they see what the enemy, the Turks, have done to this town. And it happens to be that one of his lead warriors, Talal, is from this town. And he sees what's happened. And the brutality is brutal as anything we've heard that Hamas did on October 7th.
Oh, yeah.
And more. I mean, just horrific. Talal rides off on his horse, he adjusts himself, and he charges the retreating Turks. And they turn around and he's gone. But Lawrence was so incensed that he said, take no prisoners. It's in the movie. But what's not in the movie is 36 hours of killing. It becomes inhuman. We've crossed over a line.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Eventually, yeah, there's so many stories of victims becoming victimizers and
victims.
Yeah. And the psychology of revenge and anger is really complicated. And yeah, you ask a brilliant question. When does justice become revenge, or when does it become something else? And that's a great question, but unfortunately, when you're in the moment, you're not prepared to answer that.
That's it. That's exactly it. There's no time for grief.
No, it moves beyond and over that, right?
It does.
Well, I hate to just totally change course, but that's what I'm going to do here.
Yep.
This has been incredibly deep and intriguing, and I hate to do something corny, but I will, and ask you just some fun, quick questions. You've had a life of adventure. No, these are easy ones. These are not like, in what year did, Columbus sail the ocean blue?
1492.
That's okay. 1 for 1.
1 for 1. There goes rapid fire question 1. Thanks, Wells. These are just real quick. They're just kind of a fun way to engage and maybe to touch on some things we've already talked about, and may know some of the answers to this, but what's your favorite mountain? Since this is a mountaineering podcast, I sense it's one of 3, but
well, I'd have to say Baldy because I've spent so much time there, and it's been an embracing, emotional, physical, challenging, embracing, solo. The sunrise, I was taking pictures for a while, and not everything, but like a sunrise. I just stopped because it's just too much. But I kept just one on a cairn. It's just the sunrise coming through a tiny little crack, and it just says everything. It's been a part of my personal growth for sure. Santa Fe, Baldy, wow. Rain, snowstorm, snow.
Yeah.
I had my on those MSR lightning ascent snowshoes, and I've seen eclipses, full moons, total darkness, and more shooting stars.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving some love to New Mexico 12ers. That's what I grew up hiking. I've hiked Baldy a few times myself.
Did you know where I'm looking?
And there's multiple ways to get up there. There's the Windsor Trail, and then I've done it from Iron Gate Campground. A much longer hike that way through the Pecos.
Yes.
I love peaks in New Mexico. My favorite peak growing up was Mount Taylor, way out west.
Oh, really? Yes.
And my parents lived in Grants when I was a kid and stuff. And so I've been out there a number of times, and it's magic because there's nothing around it. And you can see on a clear day, you can see for 150 miles in every direction.
So we've talked about a lot of positive experiences on your adventures. Do you have a least favorite adventure experience that you can share?
I can't say. That's kind of against my DNA. What I have learned is adaptability. And it's been simply, my mother told me when I was 11 years old, we needed a door on the side of the barn. I think you can make it. What do you think? And I said, sure, Mom. Eyeball to eyeball, 11 years old. And she said, okay. She handed me a coffee can of nails. And I looked in and she said, now you take these and bend these straight. And when you've used all of them, we'll see about getting one. Problem solving, adapting, accepting. And I was young and I did have an issue. It's like, I never said it to my mom, but I took them out and it was like, and I learned to take that can of nails and I made them straight and I used them. So it's adapting to things. That's an adventure. Part of an adventure is the lessons learned from it, not the pictures or the number. I've done this over 100 times. Great. But I know what that means. So it's adaptability. And I don't find that one would ever take a day back and want to relive it. And two, throw me your best shot. Change, great. Alan Watts said the way to manage change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. And change comes from adapting to things. I'm learning not to judge.
Oh, there you go. Well, and you're also a carpenter, it sounds like, too, amongst all your other roles and adventures.
Every house I've been in, I will say I'm fortunate enough to have a skill to make it more livable.
There you go.
Next question. What's the weirdest thing you've seen in your journeys?
The weirdest thing, now this just popped up. I was invited in Saudi Arabia. We were in a small town called Al Ghahma, and it's a very southern part of Saudi. It's fairly close to the Yemen border, and it's where we were doing an 8-day sea festival. Now, part of doing this was, and being the producer, the lead guy on this, was being invited all the time to different places or people coming and they want to see locals to see what's going on. And this is the middle of nowhere. There's the Red Sea, and there's camel carcasses and fronds from kind of palm tree-ish looking things. And we're scraping the ground and we're going to put a festival there, 8-day sea festival. And so the local mayor invited me to dinner, and we're sitting in a concrete room with, I was going to say strobe lighting. It was moving like that, but it wasn't quite like that, with fluorescent lighting on the floor, eating with your right hand. I'm sitting on his left, position of guest. Other people were there. I had my translator, and they brought out the huge tray with a goat on it. And I've had several traditional meals like this. Oh, I love it. It's great. Except in this time, there were these things sitting on top of the skull of this goat. My interpreter said, hey, he asked you if you want that. Not eat it. It's intestine. I said, what? It's goat.
Oh, wow. We have a winner. Yeah. It's a delicacy.
It's a delicacy.
Yep.
And I of course, people would pull pieces of meat and toss it my direction. But it started with this guy. They all look biblical. I mean, the Bedouins that are truly of the desert and the camel owners, it's the layers of wool and camel's hair and the wraps on the head and the big belt girth and big sandals on their feet. And some walk around with staffs. And so the vision, so we're sitting here and then he asked me, and so I thought, I can do this. And I remembered that in Lawrence of Arabia, there's something in there where you eat something. I did. It was the most awful thing I had ever tasted in my life. It was the most.
I was waiting for the drop there for you to be like, and you know what? It was actually kind of good. No.
It was just smearing. I thought should I? No, I said, I'm not going to just swallow it. Go ahead, let them see, because I was being watched. And that just gave me rank, doing that. But it was the most disgusting thing I'd ever had in my life. So anyway.
Wow. Oh,
that's gold. Maybe just a couple more questions for Wells. These are so great.
This is awesome. One thing that Zach and I love to do in our podcast, especially when we talk about specific adventures or specific mountains, is we try to ascribe a song to that particular adventure or that mountain. It's just, music is kind of in our DNA. So if you could pick any adventure or all of your adventures combined and ascribe a song to it or to those, what would that song be?
Man, it's interesting because on Baldy, I was in between relationships. And for some reason, I heard Catherine McHugh sing a song, I've Got You Under My Skin. It became a metaphor for everything, just like you're saying. I've got you, and I would sing it. And sometimes people would hear me and they're going, someone singing. You're the one singing. Yes. Mm-hmm. And it was just partly because after you do these things, what I haven't said is on the way back, coming off the mountain, the 7 miles off of Baldy, and pushing. And I use poles, because it's power hiking. It's like,
Yep.
I think I'm a little delirious, but I've got you under my skin.
I love it.
Maybe one last one here.
Yeah.
I love that. Do you have a favorite sunrise or a great sunrise story where something happened?
It's the attempt for the sunrise, but it was the weather on top. It was a different kind of sunrise. There was a wind at the top of Baldy. Now, you know where I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Probably 8 feet over my head. It was the first time I saw a stream, the wind stream, come from below, up and over, and I could take a rock, toss it up, and it would fly away. But I was in okay man's land.
Mm-hmm.
Coming down from that, I saw the sunrise, but it was the combination of experiences. Now things are just like flying into my head. Some solar eclipses. Yeah, there's been a number. If I really think about it, like the one I told you that I have the picture of, it's just piercingly authentic and true.
You've done so much, from being in Antarctica in the 70s to the Middle East to New Mexico and Colorado hiking and acting in between, sipping Gatorade for the masses. What are the little bits of wisdom that you would pass along? Like you've said a number of times, it's about the journey. It's about getting there, and it's about adaptability. You've clearly not only done, but thought about doing. So what are some of the things that you would want to pass on?
You can do it. You, talking individually, can do it. You can have your adventure. You can ignite your curiosity, get up out of your chair and do something different. And it's you not to be compared to anyone else. Expand your reach, which is mental, and take that mentality onto something. Walk around the park, just get up and go. You talked about it's green and blues, and it took me this morning, just before coming on, so I was writing down and I was going, ask them what green and blues. I said, I bet it's green and blue ski trails. We all can find levels of inspiration from just the little things that we do and not knock ourselves down. Bad self-talk, and break the mold. Some people say, look, I got everything under control. I'm fine. It's like, a little more curiosity, a little more humanity, but you can do it. And whatever that means to you, get up today, do something different, have a little adventure. And adventures doesn't mean you have to climb a big mountain, but that's there for you. And that's what this podcast and you guys are offering to your listeners. Hey, listen to these stories. You too can climb up. To the more formidable adventures, I say do a sunrise summit, not one. Try one each season. Put yourself in a snowstorm. Whoa, 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 whoa. Yeah. I've been in snowstorm. I could tell you, yeah. Well, did you make it? Did you do it? What did you do? Try, work, do it. See, because that will increase just so many unseen qualities in you that will become seen growing as a person. And hey, we got to learn to love more, period. And start with yourself and expand. It's been fun talking with you guys.
This has been great.
This has been a joy.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed our talk here, Wells. Just for listeners, again, on the way out here, if people are interested in you, how can they find you? And how can they access your book and anything else related to you?
Well, I am on LinkedIn. My acting name is Tad Jones. So LinkedIn will have the book, it will have my IMDb page, my reel that I have from the work that I've done, film work and television work. And there's a little bit of it. The book itself, there's two ways. We have a website that is called aligninthe.sand.book.com. And there you can get information, not about me or Miles, but about Magnus and Finn, everything about the book. There's a bot there that is a new kind of bot that you can actually ask any question and get an answer as to the book, anything about the book. And there's also a playlist, an Apple playlist that you can tap into that's pretty cool.
Love it. I love the musical component to that. That's great.
Oh yeah. One of the last songs that's mentioned in the book is Billie Holiday's Good Morning Heartache.
Mm.
It's appropriate for where it's placed, but there's some real hip, cool jamming stuff. And then Amazon. And there are a number of other titles of A Line in the Sand, but ours is A Line in the Sand, Miles Spencer Wells Jones. And we're just thrilled that there's been some nice reviews. Anyone going to the site, you can check that out. But you can also get a sample of the book and the Audible. Eduardo Ballerini, the man with the golden voice, the narrator of the Audible. So there's Audible, Kindle, and paperback. And thanks, guys.
Hey, thank you so much, Wells.
Well, Eric, that was a really interesting interview with Wells Jones. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think he was a lot of fun to talk to, Zach. It was great to hear all of the stories that he was able to share. One of the things that we really get out of having a podcast, and especially having guests, is hearing their stories and hearing the experiences they've had and ultimately relating where we can and learning. It was a lot of fun to hear what he had to share. And one thing that stood out to me, so I tend to be more of, I guess, a destination kind of guy than the journey. And I think he may have a little bit of both, but he may be more of a enjoy the journey and then the destination will come. And just to hear his perspective on kind of that viewpoint to go along with his stories was really refreshing and it was really cool. So what'd you think, Zach?
Very similar. I came away with two really distinct impressions. One is that it's often said that wisdom isn't having experience, it's reflecting on experience.
Mm.
And I think that what Wells did in particular and has done throughout his life, it seems, is not only had a lot of experiences, but thought about them and learned from them as he's gone along. And the second thing is that journey orientation that you were just mentioning. I think he really enjoys getting up at 2 a.m. and hiking in the dark for a sunrise ascent or getting ready for a Middle East adventure with a good friend
Mm.
or preparing a nonprofit kayak launch with a group. I think all of those things, it's not just about where he's going, it's about getting there. In particular, the Middle East journey was just about the getting there, right? In every phase.
Yep.
So I really like that. And I like meeting people that are geared a little bit differently than me and that have clearly done way more than I have and in way cooler ways than I have. So, yeah. In Wells's 20s, he was in the Antarctica. In my 20s, I was reading books in grad school. So, just a little different. But yeah, I thought it was really fantastic and I learned a lot, and I hope our listeners enjoyed the conversation as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Zach, if any of our listeners want to get in touch with us or want to interact with the Greens and Blues community, how can they do so?
There's various ways. They can email us directly at greensandbluespodcast@gmail.com. They can find our Facebook group, Greens and Blues Podcast. They can go to your YouTube channel that you've set up and posted a few things on. They can find me on X at NMHikerPerson or on Blue Sky at Zach Simpson. So lots of different ways to get in touch with us. And we've always enjoyed hearing from you guys. And Wells actually came to us by hearing about us and writing us directly. So if there's anybody out there that has great stories to tell and wants to hear a couple knuckleheads ask them questions, then you know how to reach us.
Indeed.
And Eric, before we go, what do our listeners have to look forward to in our next episode?
Next episode, Zach, we're going to maybe relive a little bit of pain. We're going to go through some of the 14ers that turned us back and share stories of why and on what mountains we didn't quite get to summit.
Well, maybe we can also be like Wells and learn from our experience.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Let's hope.
Not saying we
hope.
did, but maybe.
Well, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.